Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious, absolutely edge-of-your-seat prisoner of war escapes in modern history. We're talking about a story packed with intense strategy, just incredible human resilience, and a total masterclass in resourcefulness. It's one of those historical events that really proves reality is often way more gripping than fiction. We're going to walk through the exact mechanics of how three captive pilots managed to break out of a highly secure facility. We'll look at the improvised tools they used, the timeline they followed, and the tiny, totally unforeseen details that ultimately decided their fate. All right, let's jump right in. So we're going to drop right into the climax of our story here. Picture this. The date is August 13th, 1972. It is a dark, incredibly stormy night at a heavily guarded POW camp in Rawalpindi, Pakistan. Following the 1971 war, 12 Indian Air Force pilots were being held in this facility, and the security was absolute. We're talking towering walls, barbed wire everywhere, and armed guards constantly patrolling the perimeter. It was a place literally designed to make escape impossible. But on this specific night, under the cover of a massive thunderstorm, three of these pilots, Dileep Parulkar, M.S. Grewal, and Harish Singhi, were about to test that impossibility. That thunderstorm? It actually provided the perfect auditory cover for a shockingly direct plan. First, they had to quietly break through this final paper-thin layer of plaster in a tunnel they'd been painstakingly digging for months. Second, they had to physically squeeze their bodies through this incredibly narrow, pitch-black hole. And finally, once they were actually outside their cell, they had to sneak past a sleeping guard and scale that towering barbed wire wall. Now keep in mind, they didn't have climbing gear. They literally just had a makeshift rope fashioned entirely out of tied-together clothing. As the rain just poured down, they executed these steps one by one, scaled the wall, and vanished into the night. Section 1. Captured behind enemy lines. Okay, to understand how these men found themselves squeezing through a wall in the dead of night, we really need to rewind about 8 months to the 1971 war, which kicked off on December 3rd. Just a week later, on December 10th, pilot Dileep Parulkar was on a mission to take out a strategic watchtower near Zafar Wall. During that run, his jet was shot down by anti-aircraft fire. Now, Parulkar managed to eject, but he landed directly in enemy territory. He was injured, quickly surrounded by locals, and taken straight into military custody. Fast forward a bit to December 25th, and news reaches the camp that the war has ended. Now, a lot of prisoners thought this meant they'd be going home immediately, but Parulkar realized something absolutely crucial. Diplomatic prisoner exchanges can take years. He knew that if he wanted his freedom, he couldn't just sit around waiting for a treaty. He had to engineer it. And you can see Parulkar's mindset right from the very beginning of his captivity. During his initial, honestly grueling interrogation, a Pakistani officer demanded that he draw a map of the Adampur Air Base, which was a highly strategic Indian military installation. At first, Parulkar refused, but eventually, under intense pressure, he caved and agreed to do it. But here's the kicker. Instead of drawing the sensitive military base, he drew a highly detailed map of the civilian Mumbai airport. It was just this incredibly bold act of deception, pulled off right under the interrogator's nose. Well, obviously, when the interrogating officer realized he'd been tricked, he was absolutely furious. Parulkar's punishment was brutal. He was ordered to stand in the corner of a damp, pitch-black cell all night long, and a guard was literally ordered to shoot him if he dared to sit down. But, history is full of these complex, very human moments, and this is a big one. As the night dragged on and Parulkar's injured body really started giving out, that Pakistani guard showed a remarkable moment of empathy. The guard quietly whispered to him, "Sit down until morning. If someone comes, I will cough, then you stand up." It's just a really powerful reminder that even right in the middle of a war zone, individual humanity can still cut through. Section 2. Plotting the impossible. So after enduring those initial interrogations, Parulkar and the others were finally moved to the central POW camp in Rawalpindi. And it was here that the actual logistics of the escape really started taking shape. This phase was heavily influenced by the camp's commander, Usman Hamid. And it's so fascinating how totally ordinary objects became their tools of liberation. See, Hamid was actually known for treating the prisoners with professional respect. So in a gesture of goodwill, he gifted the pilots a cassette player and an atlas just to help them pass the time. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed them the keys to their escape. Parulkar, along with M.S. Grewal and Harish Singhi, began studying that atlas night after night. They quickly realized that heading straight for the heavily militarized Indian border was basically a suicide mission. So instead, they mapped a completely different route. they decided to head towards the border of Afghanistan. All right, so they have a route, but now they needed supplies. The prisoners were getting the super meager monthly allowance of just 57 rupees. Over several months, they painstakingly saved up this cash to buy high-energy, non-perishable foods. We're talking condensed milk and dry fruits. But food alone wasn't going to cut it. They needed to blend in. So they cleverly used some of that allowance to literally pay the camp's own tailor to sew them traditional Patani suits out of clothes they'd received from home. And the most genius part of the whole shebang, they dismantled that gifted cassette player, took out the tiny magnet, and magnetized a standard sewing needle to create a fully functional makeshift compass. Just incredible.
Section 3. Digging to Freedom.
With their survival kit ready, they had to figure out how to actually break out of the building itself. And the physical execution of this plan, it required immense patience, physical endurance, and just a whole lot of stealth. 18. That is the thickness, in inches, of the solid brick and cement wall they had to get through. They strategically got themselves transferred to cell number 4 because that cell sat right smack up against the camp's outer perimeter. Now, to breach an 18-inch thick wall, you'd normally want, heavy machinery. These 3 men had to do it using only a stolen pair of scissors and a tiny screwdriver. So to actually chip away at that wall, they established a strict, nerve-wracking nightly routine. First, they intentionally blew the fuse of their cell's light bulb. And the slow wheels of bureaucracy actually worked in their favor here, because getting a bulb replaced in prison takes days, leaving them completely in the dock. Then, from exactly midnight to 1 a.m., while one man frantically scraped at that 18-inch wall with the scissors, the others kept watch. They painstakingly collected all the extracted dust and debris and hid it right under their beds. Then, right before dawn, they would carefully replace the outer layer of cement so the wall looked completely untouched to any passing guards. And crucially, there was a 4th pilot in their cell, Vidyardhar Shankar Chadi. He didn't even want to escape, but he acted as their decoy, covering for them whenever they were surprise guard checks.
Section 4. Caught at the border.
Okay, fast forward to the morning of August 14th. They had broken the final plaster, squeezed through the wall, scaled the wire, and successfully vanished into that stormy night. They were exhausted, but they were finally free, navigating the outside world. They actually managed to catch a bus to Peshawar, posing as Christians to avoid any religious or medical checks that could give away who they really were. They were making unbelievable progress towards the Afghan border, specifically aiming for a crossing near a location they'd spotted in their atlas, the Landi Khana railway station. They stopped and asked a local at a tea stall for directions. But here's the fatal flaw in their plan. That atlas Usman Hamid had given them, it was heavily outdated. The Landi Khana station had been closed and completely abandoned since 1932. Asking for a place that literally hadn't existed for 40 years immediately set off massive alarm bells. A suspicious crowd quickly gathered around them, and a local Tehsildar's clerk started aggressively questioning the group. Parlugar stuck to their cover story, insisting they were just Pakistani Air Force officers on leave. But the clerk, he wasn't buying a word of it. So in a desperate high-stakes bluff to try and establish some authority, Parlugar drops the name of literally the only high-ranking official he knew. He says, if you don't trust us, speak to Pakistan Air Force LDC Usman Hamid. He figured that name drop would scare the clerk off, but actually, it backfired spectacularly. The clerk didn't back down. He literally just picked up a nearby phone and called Hamid's office. Meanwhile, back at the camp, Hamid was already staring at an empty cell and a gaping hole in the wall. So when he got on the phone and heard Parlugar's voice on the other end, well, the gig was officially up. But here again, we see the wild nuance of history. That local crowd circling the pilots was getting really hostile, realizing these guys might be enemy fugitives. Hamid, realizing the extreme, immediate danger his escaped prisoners were in, told the clerk, "These are our men. Keep them safe until our soldiers arrive." So by officially claiming them, Hamid ended their escape right then and there. But his swift intervention almost certainly saved all 3 of their lives from that angry mob.
Section 5. The ultimate release.
So, the 3 pilots were taken back into custody, their incredible journey totally cut short just 5 kilometers away from the Afghan border. It begs the question, what happens when you survive the impossible only to end up exactly where you started? Well, as punishment for their breakout, all 3 men were thrown into solitary confinement for 30 long days. By late 1972, the group was moved to a much larger jail in Faisalabad that held over 500 prisoners of war. But remember Parlugar's initial calculation that diplomacy takes time? He was absolutely right, and the wheels were finally turning. Following intense diplomatic negotiations, in December 1972, Pakistan's President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto officially ordered the release of the Indian POWs. When the men finally crossed the Wagah border back into India, they were met by thousands of cheering citizens. It was a massive hero's welcome for men who simply refused to just sit around and wait.
And we'll wrap up today with this thought. The Great Rawalpindi Escape isn't just some cool military anecdote. It's a really profound study of the human spirit. It asks us, what does it take to keep the flame of freedom alive when you are entirely surrounded by walls? Whether it's having the resourcefulness to turn a cassette player into a compass, the sheer patience to scrape through 18 inches of solid brick with a pair of scissors, or experiencing those surprising moments of empathy from guards and commanders across enemy lines. This story reminds us of the extraordinary, almost unbelievable lengths human beings will go to reclaim their agency. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the impossible.